topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, joining you live from Dallas, Texas, home base for me. If we've not met yet and you don't know me, I'm a management consultant and an organizational logotherapist specializing in activating meaning and purpose inside organizations. My team and I help companies to detect and articulate their purpose to thread it through culture and operations. And we work with forward-reaching organizations to develop inspirational leaders who create cultures where people actually want to come to work and do their best. We also provide programs that enable individual team members and leaders to discover and unleash their passion and purpose at work to catalyze fulfillment, engagement, and productivity. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. Also, if you like the content of this show, you may also be interested in my next book coming out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. You can pre-order your copy at bookshop.org or barnesandnoble.com. Now let's get into the program. With us today is Frank O'Connell, the unconventional business leader who spent more than 50 years revolutionizing companies like Reebok, HBO Video, Skybox International, Gibson Greetings, and Indian Motorcycle. We'll be talking about his new book, Jump First, Think Fast, an unconventional approach to high performance, in which he shares his exuberant attitude towards business and life. He joins us today from Woodstock, Vermont. Frank, a hearty welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you, Elise. Great to be here.
It's so wonderful. Well, as I said to you in our LinkedIn exchange over the weekend after I'd read your book, let me just show it to our viewers. Look at this beautiful thing you created. Look at that. You did that. Well, as I said to you in our LinkedIn exchange over the weekend, Frank, you are absolutely a wonderful example of somebody who's catalyzed their own human potential. You're like a spark plug. And what a wonderful example you are for the rest of us as we continue our careers. I really appreciate how you really showcased your life, your career, your relationships in your memoir. It was beautiful and inspiring.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for reading the book and doing the homework.
I'm a really good student, Frank. That's one thing
one
thing I've always done well in life. And certainly, from the vantage point for me, where you grew up is really interesting. I'm a meaning and work researcher and identity researcher, Frank, as well. And I've been fascinated. And I really appreciate how you say in your book that the farm, and it's Ovid in upstate New York, I think, is where you grew up. And you said, strangely enough, this experience of where you grew up prepared you for a life in the fast lane of innovation and was the first entrance ramp into a mere 25 miles south in Ithaca, onto Cornell University. But I think it's interesting if you would talk a little bit about how you feel, because I know a little something because I read your book, but for our listeners and viewers who haven't yet, how did life on the farm in that small town shape you for innovation?
Well, first, my father died when I was 2.5 years old, and my mother was a city girl, continued to run the farm because she thought it was great for my brother and I to grow up there. So as soon as we were able to walk, we started working outside with the hired men. And then very quickly, she encouraged us to get into our own entrepreneurial projects. So we ended up raising 300 laying hens, 6,000 broiler hens, machinery, buying. She taught us, we'd go with her to the bank. She taught us how to buy fertilizer. And the great thing about that was, we learned hard work, but we also learned risk taking. So I think I mentioned in my book, one day we're looking out of the window, my brother and I, who's a year older, and we're about to harvest 15 acres of beans and a hailstorm cuts it to the ground. And that, but we learned that nature was, the challenge and to take risks. But it gave us great self-confidence, also, ability to work with people, negotiate, etc. It was such a sound grounding for everything after that, including the 4-H and the FFA, where I learned all the Robert's Rules of Orders and all the stuff I still use in board meetings.
Right, right. Well, and back to that Mother Nature leveling your crop. If I remember right from your book, after that happened, you're like, well, we have to eat. So is that when you guys went like all door to door and sold eggs around you?
Yes, we went into the egg business. We hit the worst market in 40 years for selling the eggs on the New York market. So we said, what are we going to do? Well, let's sell them door to door in the little town of Ovid. So on Friday night, we'd get in the back of the Oldsmobile with my mother and we'd go door to door, and we had a great egg route. And of course, and that's the way we bailed ourselves out.
It's such a great story of resilience and just what am I looking for? Ingenuity, right? I mean, certainly all these great things that go into innovation.
Yes.
So one of the other things that you say, which I really want to talk about and really celebrate here, is you say, and I quote, "I have found that most people creep along in their professional paths and they don't take the risk that they should to jump into the next chapter of their business and career." I really agree with that. I see a lot of, people holding back and waiting for permission, waiting to be asked, et cetera. And I really appreciate the agency that you talk about and describe your own career, and certainly in that one sentence.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so many people are captive to their own fears, about failure, and getting into environments they don't know. And, and I found moving into those, even if I failed, I grew personally and grew professionally. So I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs and young people, and a lot of that is saying, don't sit on the sideline, get into the game. Okay. And you're going to find that even with failures, you're going to enjoy life a lot more and you're going to grow much faster.
Well, what that speaks to for me, Frank, and the work that I do working to develop inspirational leaders. I have a Vitally Inspired program. Part of what I'm trying to do there with them, Frank, is help them to open their capacity to experience the greater spectrum of the human emotion and experience set, including dismal failure and frustration and overwhelm, to absolute awe and joy. And, that whole spectrum opens us. And you're right. We have to be willing to take risks to do any of that, to get the experience that comes with it and the learnings that come with it.
Yeah. And part of that, and I think it kind of goes to what you were speaking of. One of the things when I start with young people and young entrepreneurs is saying, step one, know yourself. Really understand yourself. What is unique about you? And I make them come back to me and in 5 lines, tell me what's unique about them. And then, what are their goals? Because so many young people still coming out of college are following their peer group like sheep. Well, I got to go to Wall Street and earn money, instead of saying, whoa, I'm a unique person and here's some things I'm passionate about and I can go in any path I want.
I love that you do that with young people. I do that with the work that I do as well. And a lot of times people don't know. They don't realize what makes them unique. So I want to say 2 things about what you said. One, the importance of really, really knowing yourself. I've seen, and I'm sure you have too, Frank, I've seen people who didn't do the work of knowing themselves. And then those big major weaknesses and flaws derailed their career. They didn't realize the shrapnel they were putting out into the world, right?
Absolutely correct. And that's one of the reasons, for example, now with every employee we bring in, and no matter what business I'm in, we now do an assessment and determine really, where do they fit, where are their strengths, where are their weaknesses, and are they going to fit into the organization? Because it's exactly true. I keep finding people who need to make career path changes because they're in the wrong career path for their strengths.
Right. Right. It's just I've had the pleasure and privilege and also decided uncomfort of being in front of rooms where I've realized and helped somebody to realize that they were in the wrong place. Great that we discovered it. Now, two, you got to go figure out what to do with that.
Yes,
Right. So
exactly.
yeah, so this thing of really knowing yourself, it's hard work, right, to really understand yourself. So that's part of the reason I love doing what I do, Frank, because part of what I'm doing is help people to understand themselves and what motivates them, what's meaningful to them, helping them to discover their purpose, align it through that of their organization. And it's critical.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I say, okay, what you need is you need to get people to help you make that assessment who are really honest with you, about your strengths and your weakness. And sometimes it takes going and getting some professional help, which I'm totally a big advocate of.
Yeah, it's very hard to get to where we want to go in life by ourselves, which brings me to the next point that I want you to talk about, and that is your unique way and the importance you assign to a relationship. So I know that whenever you've gone somewhere in your career, you built those strong relationships, and this allowed you networking opportunities. This is. I know that you stayed in touch with that one recruiter for years. Talk to us a little bit about your approach and your view on the importance of relationships and work.
Well, yeah, as I mentioned in the book, almost all of the big steps that I took and were from people who knew me, who I had a relationship with, who took a risk on me or encouraged somebody else to take a risk on me. And so, and so those relationships are so important. First, to be happy,
Right?
just enjoy the relationships, but they also become extremely important, in your career. And I could overcome, I'd go into a job where I didn't realize I was missing some of the major experience and components, but they said, Frank, we've got a good understanding of you and your capabilities and your adaptability. You'll learn it. We'll help you. We're going to take a risk, So that happened to me often, particularly in making big moves.
One of the things I tell people when I'm working with different organizations, and certainly when I'm doing individual executive coaching, is you need to develop relationships inside your organization and outside your organization. If you only have them inside, what happens when they ask you to leave?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, you must maintain your network, and I tell everybody starting in college, that network will be extremely valuable to you as you go through your career. I mean, I still use my Cornell network. If I'm trying to get to somebody, I know if there's somebody in that organization who's from Cornell, they'll talk to me and they'll help
Yeah.
me. But it's maintaining it throughout your career and keeping expanding it like a kaleidoscope. So.
Yeah, and you even talk about how your former boss at Hunt Wesson Foods recommended you to lead the new electronics division at Mattel. That's how that actually happened, right? So
Yes,
that's a pretty strong connection that opened a pretty fabulous door for you.
yes, and I had no experience in electronics, but he knew my skill base, and that's also the way I got to HBO Video was through another person who knew me very well and went to HBO and said, "This is the guy you ought to hire." So
We like having those kind of ringing endorsements that send us through doors, don't we?
yes,
Uh, So another thing that I want to talk about in this last segment here is, you've really created this beautiful life and career for yourself, and I really appreciate how you just really let us into your world, Frank, in the book. And I know that you retired from Parthenon Consulting, you say at age 69. Then you go on to write in your book, you say, I embrace change and am terrified of boredom. I have a consistently positive attitude, no matter what I need. No matter what, I need to keep moving. I can't sit down and watch TV. I am not interested in watching sports and I am bored by them, even though I have been in the business. The same is true for entertainment. While a lot of people in the business are caught up with star power, I always enjoyed the challenge of the business the most. Nothing compares to the thrill of innovating.
yes, and there, And we're still, still at it. Now I have a toy company called Schilling, and we've just developed an incredible product called Needoh, Needoh, which is a compression ball, and we're selling millions of units. We're in every store in America. So I'm still having a great deal of fun. I have to accomplish something every day. When I get up, I work out early, 7 days a week to stay very healthy. And that gives me very positive energy. And then I get my 5 priorities together for the day, and I've got to accomplish something.
Oh, that's wonderful, Frank. So if you heard my introduction, I'm also I'm a meaning of work researcher. I'm a purpose catalyst. I'm also an organizational logotherapist. So logotherapy is all about the notion that recognizes that meaning is our chief concern in life. And what we need is to be able to be of service to other people, to self-transcend ourselves, to be most vital and healthy. So here you are, literally a walking billboard of that too. And also, really caring for the physical vessel that, contains this spirit of yours. Now, I didn't know you're still out playing in the world of business. What are you doing?
Oh, yeah. We have a toy company called Schilling, and now I've had it for about 6 years. And it's doing, it's funny, we do all this old retro product, tin and wood, etc. But we just bought the lava lamp company about 2 years ago, and we're reinventing that. We bought the old big wheel company a few weeks ago. We're reinventing that. But this crazy product, Needoh, has just been unbelievable. So, we're using all the new social media techniques and influencers, but great fun. And of course, for me, it's, once a week I get to spend a couple hours on nothing but product innovation, which I love.
I know you do. I read your book. I know you do. And I wanted to so celebrate that. I'm so happy that you're refusing to grow up, and you cling to being a child, and you're playing with toys. I love that, Frank. Perfect way to send people into our first break. Let's grab that. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Frank O'Connell, the author of Jump First, Think Fast, An Unconventional Approach to High Performance. We've been talking a bit about his early start and his approach to navigating his career. After the break, we're going to get into some of his core principles that have driven him throughout his career as well. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us. Before we get back to the program, I'd like to invite you to check out my first book, Purpose Ignited, How Inspiring Leaders Ignite Passion and Elevate Cause. It's out on Amazon. I wrote that book to awaken readers to their passion and purpose and start them down the path of becoming an inspirational leader. And I use that content as the basis for my Vitally Inspired Leadership Program. So I hope you'll check it out. If you're just joining the program today, my guest is Frank O'Connell, the unconventional business leader who spent more than 50 years revolutionizing companies like Reebok, HBO Video, Skybox International, Gibson Greetings, and Indian Motorcycle. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So one of your mantras, and you do talk about this quite a bit in your book, and I really, really embrace this, is you say, know your customer, right? And you say, I quote, you say, few people in marketing or business ever get the opportunity to sell directly to customers. You should always live where the customer touches your product.
Yes. And that has been absolutely key for me to stay very grounded and very close to the people that are using and purchasing, my product. That's why everybody used to kid me. I'd go in and I'd take over a new company and I'd say, for the first 30 days, I'm going to do nothing but travel and go to stores and talk to consumers one-on-one till I feel I've got an intuitive feel for the consumer and what's the end benefit of the product that we're, providing them, and what is the positioning in their, in their head. So I've done that. A lot of people in the food business would kid me because I would go to cocktail parties and I would ask the hostess if I could go into the cupboard and look at their brands.
Let's Frank go. We want to spank again.
Why, et cetera. But anyway, and wear all the competitive product, use the competitive product. I ride all the competitive motorcycles, wear all the competitive sneakers so that you've got your own grasp of the product. You can't just, and I believe in studies. I do lots of studies. I believe in those, but you just can't read studies and have that intuitive feel of who your consumer is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Really think that's something we can all learn from. And now I want to spend a little bit of time really talking with you about the way that your creativity, your innovation. And one of the things that you say in your book is you say, I learned that I love and am comfortable with ambiguity and blue sky futuristic thinking. And you say, I found out early on that my point of differentiation was to be able to conceptualize strategic views and articulate them in a fashion that got a wow reaction. But I always made sure my numbers were right as well. So
Yes.
Tell us more about this blue sky futuristic thinking.
Yeah, and that's something I guess pretty early on. When I started, at Carnation Company and started working on new product development. I saw that my approach, everybody else would be talking tactically about doing things, and I would wait and I would be up at the next level at the strategic, at a much bigger, open the lens, much larger for much better opportunity and possible solutions to problems. So it's something that I perfected and I learned in meetings even early on. I would wait, I'd let everybody else talk, but I'd listen very carefully to what they had to say. And then, I would pop with this wow idea. And that always got me just above the crowd. And so people started inviting me to all sorts of their creative sessions, whether I knew their products or their problems or not, to, try to get my thinking. I also love to build off other people's ideas. I think that's critical. And I conduct a lot of idea generating sessions in all the companies that I'm in, either to solve a problem, create a product, and to some degree, I've perfected who you put in the room and how you go about idea generation.
Mm-hmm. Last week on the show, Frank, we were on with William Kilmer, and we were talking about business transformation and also innovation. He said a couple of things that are kind of pertinent or smacking down the same lane that you're talking to. And one of them is that you can ideate just by simply taking an idea just another level. It doesn't have to be like totally, blank slate. Let's just create something magnificent. You can just take something that already exists, take it to a slightly different level. And the other thing that we talked about, which you do masterfully and have made a career out of, is to take your learnings and your perspective from one industry into something totally different, and you can innovate from that new view. And you've done that over and over again.
Yes. I like, your first comment, because there is, somebody said, well, we want out of the box thinkers. And sometimes it's just thinking inside a larger box,
right?
Get you to a great solution. So, so I really, I love that. I love that whole, that whole thought. So.
Me too. And I appreciate that you've made a life and a career out of joyfully innovating. And one of the things that you also say in your book, which I think is really great for our listeners and viewers to start to chew on, because it gives them hope and it opens something for them. But you say in your book, generally the flow of ideas comes to me in involuntary ways, but I have learned triggers to opening the flow and consequently being more receptive to capturing the ideas. So that you've created or learned some kind of a system, it says. So let me let you respond to that, and then I want to go on to what the rest of what you said in that space.
Yeah. One of the things that I do is, I have a notebook, and I find, there's a different creative process when you're working on the computer than when I'm writing with my hand and I'm drawing
Yes.
pictures and things
Yes.
are coming to me. And I'm drawing one list here and another list here. And then I'm starting to cross, the lists. So, and little pictures and things. So those things help, those things really help trigger my mind. But I kind of get ideas from every place. I'm listening to the news and whatever in the morning, and all of a sudden there's something that triggers me and said, whoa, that's an idea that I can use, someplace else. And I also, is being a good listener. My wife kids me because when we go to dinner and somebody sits down next in the table next to us, I'm listening to them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and speculating on who they are, what they buy, what they're like, etc. So it's constantly the speculation on the behavior. I said, what is my job? My job is to predict behavior of consumers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wondered about how Barbara responds when you get, this constant stream of ideas. If that occurs for her as what is it? What's next? Or if she's just so used to it, she just lets it roll over her back. I don't know.
Well,
Which one is it?
well, you'd love this. After making 20 moves across the country, doing all of this stuff, and which she has been great at, and she's very used to the creativity. Sometimes she said, Frank, could we just do something that's boring?
You said absolutely not. I'm sure. So one of the things that I thought was really compelling too, and it sort of reminded me to think about that when you talked about listening on the diners next door. But you say in your book that some people who know you would say that you have attention deficit disorder or ADD, and maybe not. But you say you love to be asked to come up with solutions, even harebrained ones occasionally. And you say it's part of the process of being thrown into situations I don't know anything about. You say I seldom mention half the ideas that even come to me, but I'm interested in this idea. I'm very fascinated with this idea that maybe you are a person that lives with ADD. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think that definitely is a possibility, because part of what I can do is I'm flipping from idea to idea to concept to concept. It's like a kaleidoscope, and that's probably why my mother said, Frank, your life is a circus.
Yes, you said that at the beginning of your book. It was so great.
Yeah. So, it's constantly flipping from area to area to area. And, and I do find it it really is uncommon. So at times, learning to focus, is a challenge, because I'm constantly exploding ideas. It's like one of the other aspects is it's also important to recognize a great idea. You may not be creative, but recognizing a great idea is also important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I want to make sure that our listeners and viewers also hear what I intend in this line of questioning here, and that is, whoever you are, whatever your constitution is, and back to what Frank said, of really discovering what are you good at and what do you care about, what lights you up. All of us have a unique way of seeing the world that when we find the place to put that, we can bring something nobody else can bring. And Frank, I think your ADD brain, that's part of the reason you've been so successful, is you found a way to aim that really, imaginative, creative busy mind in a very productive way. And that's the opportunity for all of us. And yet think about how many people that are listening to this episode who have been now negatively labeled with the title or a label of ADD. Right. So what I
Yes.
want to do is open the possibility and spigot of go find where to make that work. There's a way to make that work. Your opportunity to go figure out where and how to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, that's one of the other things that people that know me say, Frank, you see things that other people don't see.
Right.
That's that's part of it. But I'm sure in my organizations, I've had a lot of ADD people who've been wildly successful. And when we need to help get them focused, we can get them focused. But their thoughts and their ideas are incredibly valuable. And that's what I say when I interview someone, even a young person, I try to drop back and say, is there a possibility that there's a stroke of brilliance in that person?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm. That people
that's
have missed.
looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that, Frank. There's just so much possibility and potential in that. And that's really so much of what I stand to help bring out in people and organizations. So I've just really had to celebrate that.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about, your notion of mindsets versus skill sets. We already talked about how you have really moved and adapted to different industries and just, you switch from baked goods to video games, all kinds of different things. But you say there's always something to be learned from cross-fertilization of ideas between industries, which we mentioned before. So what I want to get to, because I spent 25 years now in the human capital space developing organizations. And what I see so often, Frank, is leaders and then the recruiters say, well, we can't hire this person because they don't have industry experience. And then they don't ever consider them. And they lose the benefit of that fresh perspective.
Oh yeah. I so totally agree with that. And in fact, in some of the businesses I'm in, when somebody comes in with all of this experience, I say to our team, the rear view mirror isn't worth anything in this game.
Right.
And so we really look for that mindset and adaptability to learn new things, quickly, and open-mindedness. And the other is, the capability. I look for, can they listen? How good are they at listening? Which is also a critical part of that, adaptability. So the world's moving so fast and the technology and everything else is moving so fast that, if you learn a piece of technology, it's probably going to be obsolete pretty quickly. So you have to be able to move, in a lot of different directions, over your career. So.
Agreed. All right, well, let's grab our last break here. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Frank O'Connell, who's the author of Jump First, Think Fast, an unconventional approach to high performance. After the break, we're going to hear some of his experience of turning around Reebok and Indian Motorcycle. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. One other bit of news that I want to share with you is that the anthology I curated called Passionately Striving and Why is out and available. That collection is a story of 25 stories from women around the world that I recruited, and they share very intimately how they discovered their purpose and are now serving from it. So it's meant to be one part inspiration, come with us, and one part education as to how they did it so you can help find your way. If you're just joining us today, my guest is Frank O'Connell. He's the unconventional business leader who spent more than 50 years revolutionizing companies like Reebok, HBO Video, Skybox International, Gibson Greetings, and Indian Motorcycle, and is still at it today. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So you talk quite a bit about your experience turning around Reebok in the 1980s. I remember Reebok. I remember running in Reebok. We could probably spend a whole episode on your experience with that, Frank, but can you just give us some kind of high points of your work doing that?
Sure. I was brought into Reebok really as the president of Reebok Brands because the company had grown but was at a point where Nike was starting to really take share from Reebok. And then secondly, they're really, it's driven by new products. And there really were no new products, in the funnel, and they had a lengthy 3-year development cycle. So my job was to really come in and kind of blow all of that up and to really get very quickly a new product, into the marketplace. And, unfortunately, it's how some of these things happen. One day, a designer came in he had all these tubes and stuff connected to a bladder, whatever, said, "Oh my God, we'll never
Yes.
make a sneaker out of this." But it triggered my thinking. And so I went back and I wrote a concept sheet about, a shoe with an inflatable bladder. And then you needed outside technology. And that's one of the things that Reebok was not good at. And Newsweek had done an article on the 10 most innovative engineering companies. One of them happened to be in Boston, Design Continuum. I went to them with my concept sheet. They came back in about 2 weeks with basically the pump shoe, the bladder. They had the pump, in the shape of a basketball in the tongue, etc. Then I put them together with we call them shoe dogs who know how to make shoes, sent them to the Far East and then said, okay, come back. And basketball shoes are the toughest because, a 200-pounder coming down in a sneaker, you can't have them, breaking ankles. So the product was developed, but then the challenge was, how do we come up with a bold advertising campaign now? To introduce it. And I went to our advertising agency, Shia Day. I took a different approach. I had one of my executives work with each one of their offices. I worked with the San Francisco office. And my directive was, I want an advertising campaign that none of your other clients would ever run. And also, we'll never win against Nike on the court. So it can't be, we put the basketball shoe on a court. So they came up with, all this stuff, running with the Bulls. And I said, find a field we can win in. Let's create our own playing field. So they came up with the bungee jump, which was these two guys in Oregon jump off a bridge. One guy's got Nikes, one guy's got Reebok. When they pop back up, the guy in the Reebok shoes comes back up, but the Nike shoes come back up empty. And when I took that back to our board and whatever, they said, "Oh my God, Frank, every mother in the country is going to call you." Perfect. So, a big risk. So we ran the campaign, and the best thing happened was one of the three major networks said we refused to run it. Well, that created the most unbelievable amount of publicity. Everybody ran to the other two networks to see the commercials and whatever. Those commercials only ran 8 times. They created so much awareness and controversy that we could have never duplicated. And in the next 12 months, we did $1 billion in pump shoes. So take a risk, be bold. And that was it worked.
And I think I remember that that was so successful that you couldn't find inventory on the shelves. People sold out of your product.
That's right. And that when the shoe sold for about $200. So
it's a good time for Pepsi and you. That's great. It's such a great story, Frank. You tell it so well.
Yeah.
Well, now we have to, of course, talk about Indian motorcycle. So you say this is so near and dear to my heart, because for me, Frank, the world of work is not a 4-letter word. It's actually a playground in which people can realize their potential, and you are a perfect example of that. But you write in your book, you say, Indian motorcycle was my greatest disappointment and yet my most exciting business experience. Regardless of everything else in my long career, people remember I was involved with Indian motorcycle. The obvious question is why? Why did I get involved? And why did it prove to be such a disappointment?
Yeah. Well, first, both my wife, Barbara, and I are avid motorcyclists. We've ridden thousands of miles, in the U.S. and around the world. So I loved motorcycling. And of course, I knew the Indian brand, the history and the DNA of the Indian brand. And the passion was saving the brand. It had been in bankruptcy for 50 years and then had been brought out of bankruptcy, and one attempt had been made to revive it, and they ran out of money and came to me and said, would I consider taking on this challenge, which I did, and I raised a lot of money. And the the challenge was they had produced a lot of motorcycles that had quality problems. So we had to rebuild all those bikes in the marketplace. And then at the same time, start a whole new attitude and culture of quality, building new motorcycles. And that just took, a lot of time and money. And, and eventually, we ran out of money. So it was, it was a great disappointment. One, you have shareholders who put money in. Then you've got all the employees who've just been stuck with you in the plants, and you work so close. You work so closely with. And then it's the riders that so much wanted Indian to win and come back on the market. So it was and I traveled the world trying to basically sell Indian to the big motorcycle manufacturers because they had all the skills in the distribution. Now, eventually, and I had gone to Polaris before and spent a lot of time with them. Eventually, it went into the creditors, but then eventually Polaris bought it and is doing a magnificent job with it. So I'm happy again. It's in the hands of the right people and doing now very well. But it was a terrible disappointment to me. And it was like working for a brand, not a company. It was like crazy. It was like working for a brand.
Bill George was on my show when he was the CEO of Medtronic. He talks about when he got to Medtronic, that's where he really stepped into his shine. That's just everything just clicked for him, and it feels like that was a similar kind of experience for you. That just was like a hand in glove kind of place for you.
Yes, it totally was. I mean, it was interesting. The first time they asked me, would I go out and take a look at the company? So I flew to Gilroy, California, landed there kind of in the evening. And I said, I just want you to give me an Indian and I'm going to ride. I rode it all through the hills and, to get my own experience, and then tried passing an 18-wheeler at about 80 miles an hour, and the rear end started to wobble. And I said, oops, quality problems.
Yep.
But I knew, I'd probably ridden more miles on a bike than about anybody in that plant, So, it was very, very personal. So.
And that's how delicious. To me, that's what work should be. It should be very personal like that. And I think that's what you're going to remember this, all the days of your life. That's the beautiful thing about it, right? It's imprinted your soul.
Yeah.
Well, then after that, so here's what's interesting. You say in your book, after shaking off the whole Indian experience, then you got a call from a local recruiter. And they were representing a local bakery called King Arthur Flour nearby Norwich, Vermont, looking for a new board member. And so they'd heard about you and you were interested. They wanted somebody who had consumer products background in the food industry. And you'd also spent 7 years in the baking industry, but you were a great fit, but you were intrigued because the company was an employee stock ownership plan model.
Yes.
And you said that you were intrigued with this new form of governance. I'd like to hear your perspective on what that experience was like. What did you learn about the ESOP model?
Oh, okay. And in the ESOP is where, of course, the employees essentially own the company. And they all have shares in it. And every year the company is valued by an outside firm, so they know what the value of their stock is. But they cannot take their stock out till they retire. But the management group and the board works for the employees. And that to me it is, always named one of the best companies in Vermont to work for. It has incredible work ethic and it does so much for the community and teaches kids to bake bread and give it to poor families. It does all sorts of things that attract really great employees in a wonderful place to work. So I started, studying ESOPs and went to Washington and better understood that because they also do not pay taxes. But, when I think about it going forward, there are now about 7,000 ESOPs in the United States. And I would love to see more of them because I think it is a great model where employees control the company, they control the culture, they're highly motivated. And I'll tell you, King Arthur has been wildly successful. There are people who worked on the floor of King Arthur in the production in the bakery who retired with over $1 million. So I love that. I just love that model when you try to think of what are other than our current, classic shareholder models, et cetera. What are governance models that really give employees a lot more control and motivation, over their work environment? And ESOP is definitely one of them. So,
Thank you for sharing that. I don't know a lot about that governance model, but I'm very intrigued. And related on the heels of that, of course, and then I had to queue up and hear your perspective on today's increasing focus on stakeholder capitalism, especially given that you grew up in the shareholder focus of time. What's this
yeah.
stakeholder capitalism in your mind?
Well, I think first, let's say that the focus is moving very quickly to stakeholders versus strictly shareholders. And I'm going to tell you what. And it's a tsunami, and I don't think many people, unless you're really in it, even running a public corporation with all the watchdogs, realize how fast that is coming. I say, number one, you can't attract talent, young people, and the best talent unless you really have got a very clear mission, value, purpose, give back, and are really focused on the personal development of the employees. So you're just not going to be able to attract the talent that you need unless you move genuinely, in that direction. The second is shareholders now are investing in those companies. They want to invest in companies that really care about the employees and, where they see the mission and the other contribution they're making beyond strictly making money. So shareholders are starting to really have an impact on where they're investing. The other thing that's interesting to me is if you look at millennials who are now a little over 20% of the population, okay, and that takes you up to age 41. And then if you look at Zs, they're another 20% of the population. That takes you up to 25. Who's going to be running those companies?
Right.
They're coming, and I'm hiring them. I'm hiring the smartest millennials I can find. They're going to run the company. And believe me, if you're in a company and you've got them, they absolutely have a huge impact when you start a strategic planning exercise and start to decide on what's the mission of the company, what are the values of the company, what's the purpose of the company. They are extremely involved. So they're just naturally, they're going to emerge, running the companies. The other thing that's happening is startups. A lot of young people now are starting companies, and they come to me all of the time, entrepreneurs, as well as the baby boomers now who have built all these small companies, millions of them, are looking to sell them. And who's going to buy them? The millennials. So you got huge entrepreneurial movement underneath all of the larger corporate stuff that's going on. So I see this movement is coming so fast and a wave so big. I'm totally optimistic and, of course, absolutely for it and support it, because I think it's just going to be a much better, happier world with fulfilled employees and people, personal growth, etc.
Okay, well, thank you, Frank O'Connell, because you just fully endorsed everything that I stand for in my work. You just did it in that share. That's what I do to help organizations to be able to articulate their purpose, their mission, their vision, their values. And we serve all stakeholders. We develop employees, everything. You did everything. And that's the next book that I'm writing, The Great Revitalization. So thank you for that beautiful summation. I appreciate that. And we've done it. We've come to the end of the show already. It goes so fast. Frank, this show is listened to by people around the world that are out to create a workplace where people actually want to come to work and do their best. We create those inspirational leaders that lead them to their greatness. We do business that betters the world. What would you like to leave them with?
Well, heavy dose of optimism and encouragement. I mean, yeah. And I have to always leave with I have one mantra: be
Please.
fun, have fun.
I'm in for that. This kid that's never grown up. I'm riding your train, Frank O'Connell. Thank you so much for penning your beautiful book, for coming onto the show and sharing with us about your wisdom, your experience, your encouragement, your enthusiasm. It is wonderful to know you.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed the show.
I'm so glad. Listeners, viewers, if you want to learn more about Frank O'Connell or his book, Jump First, Think Fast, go to jumpfirstthinkfast.com. That's simple. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can catch it via recorded podcast. We are on the air with William Kilmer, author of Transformative: Build a Game-Changing Strategy, Retool Your Organization, Innovate to Win. He provides a dearth of strategies to innovate and take your company forward by creating. One of his 4 principles discussed is game-changing innovation is founded on building different and better customer outcomes. Fundamental to transformative success is a focus on developing solutions that deliver a new and unique customer outcome, something that I think Frank would totally love and support. Next week, we'll be on air with Scott Jeffrey Miller talking about his new book, Master Mentors, 30 Transformative Insights from Our Greatest Minds. See you there. And remember that work is an integral and important part of our lives and can be one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.